Hi, my name is Kerry Gerich, and I am the current president for the Knowlton Alumni Society. And I would like to introduce and welcome the Knowlton School's new director, Dorothée Imbert. Dorothée has an accomplished academic background, which includes a professional degree in architecture from Paris, 2 master's degrees from the University of California, Berkeley in architecture and landscape architecture. She taught at the GSD for over a decade and established the Masters of Landscape Architecture program at the Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Arts at Washington University in St. Louis. She is an internationally recognized author with many publications which showcase her extensive knowledge of landscape modernism. Dorothée joined Knowlton in 2013 as the inaugural Hubert C. Schmidt 38 Chair in Landscape Architecture. She was named one of the most admired educators by Design Intelligence for 2020 and is described as high standards in every aspect of the profession: design, literature, research, technology, theory, well-spoken, inspirational, fair, and witty. Welcome, Dorothée.
Thank you.
So we have some questions from the alumni that we would like to get to know you a little bit better from different alumni in all different sections. So serving as the section chair for landscape architecture since 2013, you're intimately familiar with the unique culture and environment of the Knowlton School. What do you feel is the key to the school's success?
Thank you, Kerry. So, as you mentioned, I came to the school in 2013 to lead the landscape architecture section, and I was made aware of this pivotal moment, I think, in the school's history, in that Mike Cadwell had led the school to become an entity that was really forwarding the message of the 3 disciplines. So we were really being united into a one school ideal, which I think he managed to make happen in this renewal of a series of sections, the 2 sections in particular, city and regional planning and landscape architecture. I had tremendous opportunity of hiring incredible number of exciting, energetic faculty, very diverse faculty coming from different perspectives, teaching different areas of design and theory. And CRP was also another section which was being transformed both by the leadership and also by the faculty. It's a tremendously diverse faculty. Architecture has started its transformation and is in progress. So it's a tremendously interesting moment for me to take on, because Mike has really established this foundation of collaboration and respect across the sections, which I'm not sure happened before. And the opportunity for me is to reinforce that and really raise the visibility of the school, because I think academically, culturally, and geographically, we're really poised to become the strongest leader in terms of environmental action. And when I say environmental, I don't mean ecologically uniquely, but I mean in terms of society, in terms of shaping our environment, in terms of leading the way in ideas about what design and planning are in today's world. So it's not the same situation as when I came on board in terms of financial resources. There's a budget freeze, a hiring freeze at the university level. But I think the will to take on the challenges of COVID and the Black Lives Movement are going to make this an incredible place. And I'm sure it's going to come up in other questions from you, but I think this is really a moment where we have tremendous stress in one way and tremendous opportunity. So I'm really excited about pushing the visibility of the school, making sure that faculty are being heard, that the student work is being broadcast. And in that way, we are really going to be developing our communication strategy and the way we present our ideas to the world and how we can listen to the world. So it's going to be both a kind of exchange. It's not going to be, we know everything and we're going to tell you how it is. It's going to be taking in what is happening and really create a set of discussions and dialogues with other stakeholders, but also within the school and within the university. So it's a way of kind of raising the visibility of the school, the disciplines within themselves, and then raising the visibility of the school to the outside world and the university.
Which is something that the landscape architecture program, that visibility was raised in the last 6 years since you came on board.
Right. I mean,
can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I mean, it was, I think it had, because it had this incredible history. I mean, the undergraduate program was basically turning 100 when I came on board. So we made sure to make that very much kind of driving force of our pedagogy, looking at the history of the program, reaching out to alumni, having exhibitions, having a symposium to say, look at what we're doing, look at the new hires, look at the student work, look at the theory and the practice which is going on in this section. So that was a very good model, you're right. It is smaller than the other sections like architecture and a little bit smaller than CRP, not tremendously smaller. So I think it's an interesting model to look at in terms of taking action from possibilities, finding opportunities and linkages across disciplines for us to move forward. The visibility of landscape, you're right, did grow. It's not, it's not me, it's the tremendous faculty and students getting award and getting hired in prominent firms, both in Ohio and across the nation and internationally. So that's how we can, make sure that the school is advancing, is reaching out not only in terms of curriculum and getting the best students and the best faculty, but also making known what we're doing and what the faculty are doing and how the students are being trained to perform in offices and to teach. So it's really at multiple levels. But it was a very exciting moment for landscape, you're right.
And you, well, I should say that I was in the program during that time, and I graduated during that 100-year celebration time. And we did have joint seminars with architecture, and that I felt was very successful as an introduction as a student into the real world office culture. So this is going to lead into my next question. How will you continue to do that in this new virtual model? And what does Knowlton's virtual model look like? How has the school adapted this traditional curriculum of site visits and field analysis and continue to have safe learning experiences while we're following the COVID-19 guidelines?
Right. So I appreciate you putting it in the past, like, how we've adapted as if it's set, because if there's one thing which is certain is that it's totally uncertain. We are watching with a bit of trepidation the numbers of cases in campus and off campus. But I must say that the section heads and the faculty have been tremendously responsive and energetic in their way of addressing, depending on their curriculum needs, how to best teach in this time. So for instance, landscape architecture has really focused on field studies and creating studios that can be vertical, therefore can be more flexible in terms of student numbers. And so this is building, on typical classes like ecology and technology, which, have plants ID in the fall. So we have to do those things on site. But at the same time, having hybrid models of instruction. Architecture has been addressing the change in teaching. This is coming on the heels of half a spring taught virtually. So they've taken lessons from that. It went actually remarkably well, considering the constraints of having to put together, completely changing speeds and gears in mid-semester all of a sudden. And one thing that has come up in architecture is that studios can be taught using new tools like concept board, but also rethinking studio instruction to treat it more like a seminar in terms of having students who have longer discussions with the instructor. So it's a much more interactive in a way of teaching. In the past, you're familiar with the desk grid, but this is taking, adapting the model of learning depending on the number of students. You cannot do the one-on-one anymore. So it's a much more interactive and exchange in a sense between students and instructor in small groups instruction, but also again, ramping up the kind of discussion aspect of the studio. So it's less of a top-down and more of a seminar kind of design seminar instruction. City and regional planning has been doing more online teaching and are more familiar with it. And in a sense, it was a slightly smoother transition, and I think it's been going quite well. So it's been really a way of having curricular modifications, but also ramping up the support of teaching for remote platforms. So each student has each student has its own remote computer. So your computer is mapped so that you can have access to the software and the hardware remotely from your home. One of the things, I don't know if you're familiar with it, that came up with last semester is that campus is in a sense, not everybody's equal, but it's an equalizing learning platform. If everybody is sharing the same classroom, everybody is sharing the same access to the instructor, everybody has a computer at school and access to the library, it's one thing. If you're sent home and your living and working conditions are very different, you sort of have to adapt to that and realize, that some people may not have a space to work. Some people may not have access to a computer or may not have access to internet, the broadband internet. So those things have been very much front and center in terms of discussions and making sure that we can support students individually and equally. So this is something that has come up from last semester that we're very keen on being very sensitive to and attentive to.
And has that affected the international students in the same way, would you say?
Yes, that's a very good question, because I don't know how much you followed the politics in the past month, but one additional problem that came up is that when the government established that foreign students who were not in the country and were not in-person teaching would not be able to be registering as students, would not have their visa renewed, et cetera, et cetera. So that became very, very complicated. We have not been tremendously impacted by foreign students not being able to come to the US because of travel ban or because they didn't want to be studying online while they were in the US compared to other departments in the university or other schools across the nation. But it still has had an impact in programs like the PhD program, like the MLA program, have had a few students who have not been able to register. So this is something that, in a sense, gives some freedom for students who are studying online and can be in other places. Maybe they're going to be with other students in a remote location, and it doesn't matter. But it has been constraining for students who have not been able to come to the US from abroad and get their visa working. But we've been working very hard in terms of making sure that if they are off campus, they can still have access to stipends for teaching assistants and research assistants, so that there's not an interruption of funding, which is a tremendously important thing for students who have different needs. You know, we keep reminding ourselves that we are a state institution, a land-grant university, and we have to be a democratic tool of learning in a sense. So this importance of making sure to reach everybody and teach everybody to the best of our abilities have been a very prominent part of our pedagogy in particular this semester.
And that brings up my next question. The recent events surrounding racial injustice that has compelled our profession to evaluate the historical disproportion of minorities and examine the current systematic racism that exists today. What steps is the school currently taking to improve these racial inequities? And how can the Alumni Society specifically best support these efforts? I think we all know there is a disproportion on a lot of different levels. And it's something that as an Alumni Society, we care deeply about, but we really want to take immediate action and, as you know, and do what we can now.
I know that you already are. I've heard about your great lecture series, which is a fantastic effort. As you know, we've had a town hall with the Black Indigenous People of Colors Coalition of Knowlton, which really showed how caring and involved alumni are. These were recently graduated students who reached out and made a series of demands to Knowlton in order for Knowlton to change. The school has been perhaps unequally served in terms of being attuned to issues of systemic racism, issues of diversity. We've had for several years Diversity and Inclusion Committee. The question was, you know, it's not enough to have a committee. It's not enough to have certain hires and certain recruiting practices. It has to be a sort of ecosystem, if I may use a landscape term, of inclusion. So we were looking at how to have an impact and how to operate change on different levels. This started with what can happen now, as you said, and the first thing that we changed, and it was in part due to COVID, it was in part due to the fact that we cannot bring speakers to the school and have the traditional lecture series, but how could we look at the fact that we're constrained by the delivery, by virtual delivery, and restructure the format of lectures. So the Baumer lecture series has been in the past, I would say probably predominantly architecturally driven, a lot of design lectures, probably more white male than others. So we were looking at a way of not only having a more diverse set of speakers, but changing the format into more of a conversation. So the same comment that I had about the studios in architecture having evolved from a kind of top-down delivery of instruction to more of an exchange, we were looking at how this lecture series could be not only addressing current issues, whether it is pandemic issues or issues of racism, but also engage the school and the disciplines differently. So instead of having one person be responsible for the lecture series and, you know, suggestions were being made from different sections, we have a committee which is across disciplines. So we have an architect and a faculty from architecture, landscape architecture, and city and regional planning, Eric Herman, Yasuo Motoyama, and John Davis. I reversed the order of city planning and landscape in the names, but you get the point. And they invited a number of speakers to do a presentation and have respondents from faculty or section heads within the school. So it's much more about an exchange and a dialogue than a kind of delivery of information and, you know, here is my work, and maybe there are a couple of questions at the end of the lecture. So this has been happening only once so far. It was, I think, super successful in the way that it was both structured and intimate in terms of a format. Silas Munro from Los Angeles talked about W.E.B. Du Bois graphics for his research on Blacks in Georgia. That was the graphics and the exhibition were presented at the 1900 World's Fair in Paris. So there was this incredible tale of this Black sociologist presenting a class, a very specific class of Black Americans to French people and international people who attended the fair, but also with the incredible graphics, which were tremendously modern and avant-garde, but also the tale that we were telling. And so having this conversation between Silas Munro, Karen Lewis, and John Davis, we were able to touch on issues of sociology, issues of graphic design, issues of architecture, and history and the reconstruction of the country. So it was a much broader topic, even though it was focusing on a specific aspect of an exhibition and graphics and how to tell a story through graphics, which is very appropriate for design and planning students. It also reached a much broader discussion on mentorship and models and so forth. So that was a fantastic first experience, and I was really pleased with that. So this is a way that we're seeing changes within the school, which is within the culture of the school, which is becoming more inclusive in terms of who comes to the table and what voices are being heard. So this is one example. The other example is restructuring curricula across sections in terms of addressing broader, more inclusive vision of history, not representing, as you pointed out, I come from a kind of modernist background that tends to be very heavily Western European. We have to broaden the way we teach. We have to be more inclusive in the way we select precedents for design and planning studies. We have to teach different types of history. So we're really embracing that. And the way we select studio topics, whether it is about memorialization, about sociological topics, about sites. And when we intervene in the site in the city, we should pay attention to how this design may in fact have an impact on gentrification, excluding other people. So really thinking about the whole curriculum holistically. And then finally, but last but not least, is the issue of, I touched upon mentorship. How do we attract students? How do we retain students who are from diverse backgrounds and diverse ethnicities and races when we have, a mostly white faculty teaching them? So we've been making a lot of progress in terms of gender. The planning faculty is much more diverse. Landscape architecture has improved over the past years, and architecture is in the process of changing. So this is an opportunity for us to attract a different set of faculty, but also attract a different set of students, and also being able to support the students. So it's not only supporting them in terms of making sure that they have mentors. We're creating a program where we could have mentors in the undergrads, upper class students who may be able to serve as mentors for students who are first generation college students or underrepresented minorities and are not that familiar with the way you put together a portfolio or how you deal with, different ways of presenting your work and so forth. So finding ways, both at the student level, at the faculty level, and then finally support, financial support. So we are looking we are having a capital campaign starting next month. And it's one of our priorities to find scholarships and support for underrepresented minorities to make sure that we can attract a wider set of students, retain a wider set of students and faculty to make basically the school more representative of what our world is. You know, it's been, you know, if you have the same type of faculty, the same type of students, it just kind of recreates itself, with also the caveat that as education becomes more and more expensive, even in a state school, it gets narrower and narrower in terms of demographics. So we have to make sure that we have the tools to support students who are going to make the students who can afford to come to Knowlton and to Ohio State more attuned to the world and be better designers and planners. So it's not only, you know, because we feel like it has to be good. I think it's also part of our pedagogical mission to make sure that we educate the best citizens in the world.
And I think you hit on all of the concerns and that the Alumni Society has been talking about, and it's great to hear, you know, all the things that you're going to put in place, because I think we as designers feel like we are uniquely positioned to change the built environment. And I think it's hard for, you know, for people to understand what we do from all levels, and, you know, even for LAs to understand more about planning and understanding, you know, why we are held to these codes and city ordinances that maybe we should challenge a little bit more and kind of understand this history, because we think that there's a lot we can do to change the face of this. It's just we need to shed light on it,
right,
and we need to understand ourselves.
Right. That's
great.
And you know, you mentioned the Alumni Society, and that's where, and I don't know if it's coming into this question or maybe you're coming up, you're going to come back to it later, but I thought I would mention it, is that it's really important. You know, school is, and I'm not saying that because you're the president of the society, but the school is only as strong as its alumni network is. And we have to make sure that we strengthen the relationship between the school and the Alumni Society. You know, in the past, I've had some individual connections with alumni from different firms. We've heard, you know, we would hear from you at the graduation, you know, at the commencement breakfast. There are a few events throughout the years, but I think that would be really fantastic, a way of, you know, strengthening a mentorship program. Having a more diverse set of mentors coming from the Alumni Society would be really, really helpful for us. But also, you know, I brought up the capital campaign issue, and we have a model where, of course, you know, you are going to reach out to the people who have, you know, the means to help us financially, and help students financially and so forth, and help us build, you know, better network of something, or a better technology, so resources and so forth. But we also need to make sure that the young alumni are involved, and are supporting the school in whatever capacity they can. You know, it can be as little as, you know, $5 a month, or, you know, the price of a coffee that you don't have anymore because you cannot go to the coffee shop. So that's really great. But to get them involved, to make them realize that, you know, their successes are going to make the success of the school and the future graduates. So making sure that there is a connection which is being developed, that people don't disappear into the kind of, you know, they go to San Francisco, they go to Washington, they go to Florida, wherever they go. I think finding ways to strengthening the alumni structure in those various places. We started doing that in landscape with our advisory board, and it was super helpful. But that's really, I think, something that we have to think about, is that how do we grow this kind of relationship and exchange between the alumni and the school, so that it's not, you know, the tailgate or this event or that event, but it's really a kind of continuous flow. And that's where I think the new communications program that we have in the school is going to be super helpful, in terms of making sure that we engage you, and in turn we hear from you.
Yeah, and I think that with all of the negative aspects of COVID, this virtual platform is opening up the entire world for our alumni to connect. And we've seen alumni from all over the country that wouldn't have been able to attend an in-person lecture in Columbus have joined our lecture. So we're hoping to build on this because it is so convenient for people to plug in. And we hope that that just continues to grow and it becomes a permanent structure.
The other advantage, as you mentioned, the kind of Zoom and virtual connection has also become really important for us in terms of studio reviews. In the past we were able to have, maybe 1 or 2 out of town critics to design reviews at the end of the year, at the semester. Because of budget, our time constraint, people were not able to travel. We didn't have the funds to pay for their airfare and hotel and so forth. While this has opened up, the possibility of having really a very nice roster of jurors take part in final reviews for that reason. And I think the reverse is also really interesting, is the possibility you have for students to attend maybe a pinup within a firm, so make sure that your alumni realize this is something that would be really super helpful for students to see how a firm discussion, a project can be. If firms were willing to open up their doors, in a sense, their virtual doors to our students.
Once they open up,
Once they open up, yes. Or remotely via Zoom, there was a possibility for students to sometimes attend a presentation or a discussion in an office to see how the office works.
Yeah,
that's super helpful.
And to your point, we're still working on it. we're still reacting to the COVID. Well, and that brings me really to my final question, is that the world is very different right now. It looks very different, and it will probably look different for years to come. So how can these lessons learned from the pandemic and from the BLM movement be incorporated, into the curriculum and the research? And I think you've covered a lot of these things. I guess, how do we make it sustainable? How do we not just in 2 years kind of forget the impact that this year has had on our, we probably will never completely forget it, but how do we keep this energy that I think we are feeling, especially as it relates to Black Lives Matter and racial inequities? How do we keep this going?
I think, I wish it were going to be only a year. This is maybe the Eeyore in me as opposed to the Pollyanna. I think the changes are probably here to stay. I don't think, I think it's been traumatic. It continues to be traumatic. We in our academic world are so far very protected in a way. And I think we are all extremely grateful for our situation and the fact that we can keep working and keep living in a sense, certainly changed circumstances, but we have tremendous opportunities. And, looking at the way the world is changed in terms of ecology, in terms of housing needs, in terms of transportation needs, in terms of the way we teach and the way we may have to consider how we're going to be learning. These are all incredible pressures that I think disciplines like architecture, landscape architecture, and planning are really uniquely situated to address. So I think it's both, a little bit terrifying and extremely exhilarating in the sense that we have, the world in our hands, in a sense, and we have a responsibility to be really, really careful not to go back to where we were, because I don't think that's the part which is sustainable. I don't think traveling around the way we were is sustainable. I don't think driving the way we were is sustainable. I don't think eating the way we eat is sustainable. The water usage is not sustainable. So this is, in a sense, forcing us to reconsider how to be better citizens and better designers and better planners. And I trust entirely our faculty and especially our students to have a conscience to not go back. I don't think we are going to go back. So I'm very hopeful. I think it's really tremendously stressful, but I'm very hopeful in terms of the reset mechanism that has happened in our minds, in our designer and planning minds, that we're not going to let it go. In terms of the Black Lives Matter and the systemic racism, I think it's the attitude that we're taking and the conversations that we're having which have to keep going. And that's the one which I think is going to be the most challenging, is finding the balance between remaining, continue to be engaged and not letting fatigue and getting used to it making us forget. Because it's everywhere, and it's, I come from a different background. I grew up in a very different sort of setting, and going back periodically to my home, to France, I realized, there are a lot of things that make me realize how certain patterns of thinking have become ingrained for me, and having this kind of jolt makes you realize that it's not at all something which is acquired, that it's something that you have to work for and that you have to work against in a way. So I think we have to keep it on ourselves. We really have to keep check on each other, and we have to listen to what our students and our faculty and the world is telling us. And there's no recipe, I think, for that, just goodwill and an open mind, and really the desire to listen. And I think we can all help each other, but not getting used to it, never getting used to it, I think is really important. And so keep feeling the jolt.
Great. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to introduce yourself to the alumni, and we look forward to continuing to have these conversations.
Absolutely. And please make sure that any news that you may have, go through our channels as well. So the communication should go from us to you and vice versa. And I know that Luisa is a great interface, but make sure to reach out to us with any questions or any comments. Keep mentoring, bring, different types of mentors. That would be fantastic. Thank you very much, Kerry.
Wonderful. Thank you.